The summer of 1940 marked a turning point in the history of World War II. After a rapid blitzkrieg, Germany subjugated almost the entire European continent. France, considered one of the most powerful armies in Europe, capitulated in just a few weeks. Belgium and the Netherlands were overrun with such speed that world leaders had no time to comprehend the scale of the events. However, of all the nations under threat, only one remained unconquered: Great Britain. Retreating through Dunkirk, the British Army lost a huge amount of equipment, but retained the most important assets: its men, experience, and morale. The burden of defending the entire country now fell not on the army, but on the Air Force. The outcome of the air campaign would determine Britain's survival. Hitler, buoyed by a string of victories, planned to conclude the campaign in the West with a final blow: Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of the British Isles. But first, the Royal Air Force, RAF, had to be destroyed. The German Luftwaffe was confident it could achieve air superiority in a matter of weeks. They had the latest bombers, a powerful fighter force, proven experience, and enormous industrial potential. On paper, Germany truly seemed invincible. But the British turned out to be far more prepared than Berlin thought. Even before the war, the commander-in-chief of the fighter force, Hugh Dowding, had created a unique air defense system, an integrated network of radars, observation posts, communication centers, and operations centers. This system allowed the RAF to scramble exactly as many fighters as needed, and precisely where German aircraft were spotted. For 1940, this was a technological breakthrough that Germany lacked. On July 10, 1940, the battle began, which would later be called the first major military campaign in history to take place entirely in the air. The Luftwaffe began by attacking shipping convoys and ports, aiming to cut off the country's supply lines and force the Royal Air Force into combat under grueling conditions. Fierce clashes erupted in the skies over the English Channel almost daily. Young British pilots flew several missions in a row, often with little rest. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 boasted excellent speed and maneuverability, but had a limited range, forcing German pilots to constantly monitor their fuel levels. The British Spitfire and the simpler but more reliable Hurricanes, operating within their own territory, could afford much longer airtime. The RAF compensated for its smaller resources with tactical flexibility, rapid response, and coordinated ground operations. By midsummer, the intensity of the fighting intensified. The Germans began direct attacks on RAF airfields, attempting to paralyze the defenses before full-scale attacks began. Every day, British pilots took off to meet superior enemy forces, knowing that the fate of the entire country depended on them. Often, exhausted mechanics barely had time to refuel and repair damaged aircraft before the pilot was forced to take off again. It was during this period that the legend of those whom Churchill would later call the few was born. Young pilots, often barely 20, became the last line of defense between Germany and British cities. They knew their numbers were dwindling, but they did not give up. Churchill would say, "Never in human conflict have so many owed so much to so few." Thus began the battle that would forever change the course of the war. And this was only the introduction. The most dramatic events were yet to come. By mid-August 1940, the battle was entering its most dangerous phase. Germany increased the pressure, seeking to destroy the RAF faster than Britain could replenish its squadrons. A period the British called Adeltag, Eagle Day, had begun. It was during these weeks that the Luftwaffe concentrated the largest air force ever directed against a single island. Luftwaffe Commander Hermann Göring was confident he could break the back of the RAF in just a few days. His calculations were based on numerical superiority. Germany could launch hundreds of bombers and fighters simultaneously. Britain, meanwhile, was struggling to keep pace, balancing aircraft shortages and pilot fatigue. German attacks became increasingly precise and destructive. Early warning stations, British radars, were the first to be hit. The Luftwaffe attempted to disable them to blind the defenses. Some towers were destroyed, but the network remained operational, meaning the RAF could still scramble fighters when needed. Then the German command turned its attention to RAF airfields. One after another, they were subjected to massive raids. Runways were pockmarked, hangars burned, and many aircraft were destroyed on the ground. Pilots often returned to base only to find smoking ruins. During these weeks, tension reached its breaking point. The British had little time for repairs and rest. Some pilots spent 6 to 7 hours a day in the air, sometimes 4 to 5 missions in a row. Their young mechanics were called invisible heroes. They barely slept, working under heavy bombing. However, the Luftwaffe also faced difficulties. German bombers proved too vulnerable without adequate cover. Bf-109 fighters could patrol for a limited time, as long as their fuel lasted. Therefore, they were often forced to abandon their bombers over their targets. Despite the enormous onslaught, the RAF continued to resist. Spitfires confronted Bf-109s, while Hurricanes took on the bombers. Britain held on, even though it seemed like it was about to collapse. But by the end of August, the situation would change dramatically. Mistakes by the German command, Churchill's stubbornness, and the phenomenal resilience of the pilots would turn the tide of battle in Britain's favor. However, the most devastating attacks London had ever seen lay ahead. By early September 1940, the battle for the skies over Britain had changed course. Confident that the RAF was almost broken, the German command decided to launch a strike that, in their view, would completely destroy British morale. The Luftwaffe shifted its focus from airfields to civilian centers, primarily London. The phase known as the Blitz had begun. On September 7, 1940, more than 1,000 German aircraft descended on the British capital. The bombers filled the sky like a huge cloud. Their targets were the docks, factories, and working-class neighborhoods. But the explosions quickly engulfed residential areas as well. The city became a fiery labyrinth, where entire neighborhoods burned. Almost 1,000 people died on the first day alone. Churchill refused to evacuate and insisted that London would stand to the last. His determination inspired the people who, despite the destruction and fear, continued to work, putting out fires, rescuing the wounded, and providing essential services every day. Britain's defense rested not only on the military, it stood on the shoulders of ordinary people. But the Blitz gave Britain an unexpected advantage. Striking cities allowed the RAF to restore damaged airfields. Now British fighters could operate with greater confidence. The Luftwaffe command had made a strategic mistake by underestimating the resilience of the British. The RAF continued to fight under incredible strain. Pilots were still forced to fly several sorties a day. But now the skies over southern England were becoming increasingly friendly, British radars were functioning, airfields were operational, and defensive tactics were constantly being refined. One of the key events was Battle of Britain Day, September 15, 1940. On that day, the Luftwaffe launched its largest attempt to break through the defenses. But the RAF was ready. Thanks to accurate radar data from chain home and expert coordination, the British repelled the attack waves, shooting down a record number of enemy aircraft. Luftwaffe losses exceeded their ability to replace them. When German commanders realized that air superiority was impossible, it became clear that the plan to invade the island had failed. Although the Blitz continued for many months, Britain's strategic victory was already assured. The Battle of Britain became a symbol of the power of fortitude and courage to change the course of a war. In those autumn weeks of 1940, a small island stood up to the world's most powerful air force, and held firm. By the end of 1940, it became clear that Germany had failed to achieve air superiority. The Battle of Britain ended with a strategic victory for the Royal Air Force and the decisive failure of the invasion plan. Despite enormous losses, the RAF retained the most important thing: control of the skies. This became a turning point in World War II. Britain proved to the world that the Nazi machine was not invincible. Victory in the battle did not mean the end of suffering. The Blitz continued throughout the winter and spring of 1941. Night raids rained down on residential areas, schools, hospitals, and factories. Thousands died, thousands were left homeless. But through it all, London remained vibrant and steadfast. Over time, the British learned to live with the constant threat of bombing. They strengthened their air defenses, organized rescue services, and perfected camouflage. Londoners lived by the motto, "We will endure." It became a symbol of the nation's unconquered spirit. For RAF pilots, the battle left a deep mark. The young pilots who took to the skies day after day became legends. They were called the few, because it was precisely these few who would fight for the future of an entire nation. After the battle, the British began actively studying captured German aircraft and equipment. This yielded important technical data that was later used in North Africa, the Atlantic, and on the European front. But perhaps the greatest legacy of the battle was faith. Faith that fortitude and determination can change the course of history. Britain stood firm in its darkest hour and became a bastion of resistance, from which the anti-Hitler coalition later grew.